Hello and welcome to Unproductive, a productivity series for the rest of us. In this episode of the series, I want to talk about time. So we've talked a lot about time already on Unproductive and time management, but specifically I want to talk about different ways that we relate to time and how that might intersect with time management and productivity for you. Some of what I'm going to talk about here is related to a great book I read called Feminist Queer Crip. I think I got that in the right order. Yes, Feminist Queer Crip, which is a book by Alison Kafer or Kafer. I'm not sure. It's Kafer. And this was a great book. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in disability. In particular, Alison writes about disability and time from a feminist and queer lens, and it's quite fascinating. But in reading this made me think a lot about time and how we relate to time and organize time. And first of all, something I think I have talked about before on this series is the idea of redefining what productive time is. And so I think I talked about, how it's been helpful for me to redefine self-care and other activities as productive. And that works for me because I'm able to accept productive and productivity as a framework, even as I would identify as anti-capitalist and recognize that it's not like a great framework or value for life. But I also want to acknowledge that you can totally reject productivity as a value, and you can totally reject the idea of productive time. And that is something that a lot of people have done to great success. And so, if you find that the idea of defining time as productive or unproductive, that you're able to reject that, then that is awesome. And that is the thing you should do. And I think it's great to reaffirm to yourself, whether that's through affirmations out loud or journaling or whatever, working through it in therapy, to, use that reminder, use that affirmation that time is your own and time does not have to be productive to be valuable, and that however you choose to spend your time is valid. And so using systems that optimize, make your time more efficient, may not be right for everyone. And so I want to validate and congratulate and say yes to those of you who've been able to let go of that and don't think of time that way, and say that is great and that is awesome. Also, specifically, and this came from the book and from my own personal experiences, I think it's important to be aware of how disability and illness can kind of force us to reorganize time. So I've talked on this series about spoons and how if you have limited spoons, of course you have to redefine productivity, or you have to redefine, what use of time is like, and sometimes what you were hoping to do or expected to be able to do in a day is drastically different from what you can actually do, and it's good to be able to say to yourself that's okay. And even beyond the framework of spoons, just in general, if we're sick, if we're disabled, if we're mentally ill, any of these things can make it so that time is less predictable. Time is operates on a different scale than it did maybe at a time when we weren't any of those things. It can operate on a scale very different to other people's. So there's this idea of crip time, which I think is honestly in a lot of communities, there's queer time and there's deaf time and there is native time, and all of it means late. But specifically with crip time, I think the idea is recognizing that people are going to be late in the disability community because it is hard to get places. Spaces are not accessible. Transit is not accessible. A lot of people with disabilities rely on other people, on caretakers, to get where they need to go, and therefore if the caretaker is running late, then they're running late. And so an acknowledgement of that is very common in the disability community, but it can be jarring, particularly if you may currently consider yourself able-bodied, not mentally ill, neurotypical, all those things. And then maybe at some point you get sick. Maybe it's even temporary, but you might notice that if you're sick for a good period of time, that your relationship to time and productivity changes, and that's okay, and that's something that we should acknowledge and not expect everyone to meet similar bars. I think a lot of times in the productivity community, we just assume that everyone, it's do it by your bootstraps and go forward and you know, lean in. I don't know. But basically, like, this assumption, there can be an assumption that if you just try hard enough, you can do it. And I want to say that is not true for everybody. And that's not true for a lot of people. And so we should not assume that there is a normal when it comes to how we organize time. And also, the last thing I want to say about this, and I realize this is not like a video that is rife with tips and ideas, but I think it's good. In the series, I want to balance the tips videos with some stuff like this that is more getting at the for the rest of us part of the title of this. And so this is, when you think about the like areas of life wheels you see sometimes, or a lot of productivity resources will talk about organizing your life into different like wedges or sections, or like trying to balance, sometimes it's not a wheel, sometimes it's just a list, but like trying to balance areas of your life. And usually these resources suggest strongly specific areas of life, and sometimes it's like, oh, you can add or subtract one or two, and some of them do say you can redefine them completely. But I want to say, like, give yourself permission to completely redefine the areas of life wheel. When you think about your time, you know, what's important to you may not be, what is it usually? Spirituality, family, relationships. That's another interesting one. A lot of times family and relationships are separate. Like, there's something you can tell in these areas of life that typically come up of how people balance things, and some of the like structures that exist in our society. Just the idea that there's like romantic relationships, and then there's family, which usually means children, and maybe like your parents, and maybe probably not your spouse if there's relationships separate. But there's that idea. Like friends, like where does friends go in that? I'm not sure. So like for me, that has never worked. I like people would be one wedge of my wheel. That would include anybody. Other things like, you know, maybe spiritual doesn't like fit in for you. Maybe what are some of the other ones? Like, what does work actually mean? What are hobbies versus work? Like, that might vary a lot for you. Is fun part of your wheel? A lot of times I don't think fun is in there. And your wheel, if the goal doesn't necessarily have to be to make them all the same. I think often it's like, balance your wheel and make your life areas the same. And so organize your time in such a way that they're all level 10. Like a level 10 life is a phrase I've seen a lot. That might be ideal for you, but I would encourage you to like both to figure out what the areas are for you, and then to ask yourself, is my goal 10 in all of these? Or is my goal, you know, balance between all of these? Or do I prioritize and care more about a certain area right now or persistently? So it might be that, for example, spirituality is important, but it is a lower level of importance to you consistently than other things. It might be that work is important, but relationships are way more important, or the reverse. There is no one way to do this, and the idea that there is kind of laughable, because we all have different priorities, and that is a good thing. So, yeah, this has been kind of a rambling episode, but I would be curious to know what you think. Have you in your life found that you needed to organize time differently in different stages of your life? Like, have you found that you needed to reorganize time or change how you think about time because of something in your life situation? Whether that's disability, maybe it's having kids, maybe it's caring for a sick or disabled relative. Could be a number of different things. But let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to get notified when there are new episodes.